Okay, looks like we're recording now. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Water Funds Network webinar today. Pretty excited about this topic and some of the other things that are going to be covered. I have a couple of announcements. One which I just made that as a heads up, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it for those that are unable to attend live. And let's see, I'll be sure to send out the link to the recording and presentation materials afterwards as well. And yeah, so just a few announcements to get started. The annual survey for this network of members to measure connectivity and identify support needs and expertise and a number of other things that the network provides. It's a bit delayed, but it will be coming out very soon. So just a heads up to keep an eye out for the link to the survey, which we would love everyone to complete. And even if you're not working on a water fund per se, it's still it's a survey of our members, not necessarily of our water funds. So please do fill that out when it arrives in your inbox. I'll put this in the chat. On Friday, a new report was published. It's called Resilient European Cities, Nature-Based Solutions for Clean Water. And that was led by two of our TNC colleagues. So let me put that in the chat now. I'll give a link to the report directly, as well as our nature.org page, Global Insights blurb about it. Okay. Okay, so those are in chat. And let's see, add one other thing. Oh yeah, so just for sort of structure of today's webinar, the plan is to save all the questions and discussion to the very end after the presentations, but we do encourage you to post your questions into the chat, and I'll monitor those and keep track of them so that nothing is lost. So as they arise, feel free to drop them in there so that you don't forget and we don't forget. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So yeah, I'd like to just introduce our topic on return on investment for water funds and economic analysis of nature-based solutions for water security. We have a good group of folks working on this at the Nature Conservancy. I think all have been, I think Carlos has been with us, about 4 years, and Brooke and Eustace over 5 years. Myself about 8 years, although I'm not presenting particularly on the topic, but I will go over some resources towards the end. So yeah, I think with that, I'm not sure I have much more of an introduction. I might hand it to you, Brooke, and see if there's anything you'd like to add.
Sure, thanks, Emily, and thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Brooke Atwell, the Conservation Strategy Manager for TNC's Water Funds team, and today we'll go over what it means to conduct an ROI analysis. We have about 4 case studies, one very detailed for Cape Town, our Cape Town Water Fund. Eustace will go over that. Then I'll give some really high case study highlights on Quito, Dar es Salaam, and Camboria. Carlos Rahelis will go over the waterproof ROI app that's currently in development, so give you guys a sneak peek of that. And then Eustace will review placing the ROI in context. So once you've done an ROI study, what does that mean for the rest of your project development? Emily will connect us to some resources and then moderate our Q&A after the fact. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so today we'll mention the components of a good business case. So how to develop one for a project that really focuses on nature-based solutions for water security. So the 4 components that you're seeing on your screen right now are sort of the key ingredients for your business case. First, you'll really want to identify what those potential technical NBS options are that could address your water security challenge. Here, we really focus on the NBS themselves. So for example, if you're struggling with flooding, might you want to consider wetland restoration in your economic analysis? The economic and financial analysis itself will really help you determine what the optimal portfolio for nature-based solutions are in your particular context. And when we say optimal, we're really referring to the portfolio that can get you the best return on your investment or in reality, your investor's investment. Once you have a good idea of that portfolio, you'll want to map out the funding that you know you have available to cover the cost of that program, and then discern whether or not you have a funding or a financing gap that you need to cover. And lastly, though this is very closely intertwined with your funding and your financing strategy, you'll want to define what that governance or that institutional arrangement you will need to be able to make decisions about the management of your NBS program. And so the arrangement that you ultimately choose may have an impact on what sources of funding you can leverage and vice versa. The funding might dictate the type of arrangement you can have as well. Today, we're really focusing on this grayed out portion, Module 2, the economic and financial analysis, though we do have upcoming modules on each of the remainders that should be out in summer of 2021. Okay, so a return on investment analysis, what is it? It's essentially identifying the costs and the benefits of a particular project, but expressed in monetary terms. In other words, if I invest $1, how much will I or will my investors get back in benefits? It answers questions like, what is the optimal nature-based solutions portfolio to achieve my specific water security goals? What are the monetizable ecosystem benefits of this program? And when are those benefits expected to show up? And when they do show up, who is the person or who are the group of people that benefit from those NBS solutions? And how does the proposed portfolio really compare to other alternative infrastructure investments? So this could be other gray infrastructure investments, other green infrastructure investments. How does my portfolio compare? Whoop, went one too far. All right. So what are economic and financial analyses really used for? For project developers or for your internal team, it's really a helpful exercise for teams to kind of set a strategic direction for the program, identify what those M&E priorities will be, and then generate alignment among partners and among other stakeholders who will be involved or who have a stake in the outcome of your specific NBS project or program. So externally, we can really use an economic and financial analysis to drive some of the behavior changes that we'd like to see in support of nature-based solutions for water security, of which water funds, which is what we'll be talking about today in some of our case studies, are one part. So at its basics, economic and financial analyses can really reduce the barrier for people to value nature. That's at the core, which is basically a systemic challenge. Even for those early adopters who already know that they want to invest in NBS, they really often struggle with defining what investing in nature can really mean for their bottom line. When investors, however, can hurdle that valuation barrier, it really grows the pool of actors who see value in and support nature-based solutions more broadly. And to mainstream NBS, we really need the sector to see them as solutions that are as viable and as cost-effective and as reliable as alternative gray infrastructure, which many more people are comfortable with as an investment portfolio. So in an economic and financial analysis, you can also provide evidence and justification for a needed policy change. Again, by valuing nature and really showing that monetary benefit, it can be a tool for utilities to go to their regulator and lobby for the ability to invest in nature or argue for dedicated tariffs to provide that sustainable source of funds for nature. We'll review this in one of our upcoming brief case studies, how they used their economic analysis to generate that policy change. In addition to kind of mobilizing capital through policy change, an economic and financial analysis can really provide the justification for corporates and utilities, for banks and governments as well, to invest in the NBS program. So it provides that transparency around costs and benefits that is so badly needed to bring nature up to par with great infrastructure. Really, what does this look like in practice? So the economic and financial analysis framework is really built on the basics of how ecosystem structure, so things like soil, vegetation, the slope of your watershed, relate to ecosystem function, ecosystem services, ecosystem benefits, and so on and so forth. So the best way to, I think, illustrate this concept is through an example. Here in the kind of grayed out lettering that you see on your screen, I've taken a fictional water utility who's interested in reducing the concentration of total suspended solids at their intake point. That's the ecosystem service that they're interested in. Reducing TSS is the ecosystem service. So now to reduce total suspended solids, our NBS project will want to improve the ecosystem's ability to retain soil and reduce runoff. So in this case, soil retention is the ecosystem function that we're interested in improving. And it's really dependent on the ecosystem structure. So for example, does your watershed have really steep hillsides? Are there a lot of agricultural lands in the floodplain? All of this will ultimately affect the way your ecosystem functions. So depending on these characteristics, we'll then choose NBS interventions that reduce the concentration of total suspended solids. So this could be improving soil retention on steep hillsides or reducing runoff from those agricultural lands. You could do that via reforestation or riparian restoration. So these NBS interventions will ultimately improve the desired ecosystem service, which can also be stated as an ecosystem benefit, so a value, and then monetized. So the ecosystem benefit would be what we're valuing in an economic and financial analysis. So TSS concentrations, improving those, great. But lower TSS concentrations may have a different monetary value depending on how that water is being used. So if the water is being used for municipal drinking water supply, it'll have a different value than if that water is being used for irrigation. Depending on what the benefit is, will really depend on how the ecosystem is valued. So in the case of a utility, it might mean lower water treatment costs, or it could mean that they don't have to use as much water in the first place because they lose less of it during the treatment process. Each of those different scenarios would provide a different amount of monetary value to that utility through the reduction of total suspended solids. So as mentioned previously, there could be really any number of ecosystem services that you might be interested in evaluating. There are your provision services, things like food, water, fiber products. Then there are your regulation services, things like climate, flooding, pollination. And there are your cultural services. These can be things like spiritual or religious services, tourism, or education services as well. And some of these are easier to value than others. And so when you come to the final step of your ecosystem valuation, you'll ultimately apply some different tools and use different indicators to express the viability of an NBS project. Importantly, though, in looking at this analytical framework, the economic and financial valuation would be the function of the NBS interventions, so your program costs, and the ecosystem valuation of your program benefits. My colleague Eustace will delve deeper into the costing and the valuation process. But before we do, I believe we have a poll question for you. Yes, okay. Emily, are you gonna push the poll out? Great, okay, perfect. So this one is about the ecosystem benefits that you particularly are interested in promoting, and you can choose all that apply. Water quantity, we have surface water, groundwater, dry season availability. Water quality, we have both sedimentation and nutrient loading. And then we have disaster risk reduction and other. Give you all just a bit more time. All right, Emily, you can close that out whenever you think we have enough votes.
Okay, will do. They're coming in fast now that we're about to close. All right, last chance. Okay. Share results. Here we go. Are you able to see those results?
Yes, I can see them. Thank you. All right, so dry season availability just barely edging out sedimentation and surface water, followed closely by disaster risk reduction. Oh, and 3% of other. If anybody's voted for the other, type that into the chat. I'd love to see what you guys are thinking. Great, thank you. With that, Eustace, I believe I will pass it over to you, and I've got control of the screen, so just tell me next whenever.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name's Eustace Rappel. I see many friends on the line, so that's really great. Hi to those of you that I know, and nice to meet you for those that I don't. So I work as a conservation finance lead for the Global Water Funds team, which means that I worry more or less full-time on executing things like ROI analyses and funding homes for programs that are doing that type of execution. So all to say, this is a very big problem of mine to deal with this on a regular basis. So what we're going to be going through next is the set of building blocks that is important to mentally wrap your mind around from a conceptual basis. So next. So the first thing to think about in your ROI analysis is your who's your beneficiary that you're targeting. It's important to go into the analysis with a specific view as to who is specifically going to be the beneficiary of these activities. Like if you are targeting a bunch of upstream interventions from a water utility, that water utility is your quote unquote client. There might be multiple quote unquote clients that you're thinking about in this framework. This beneficiary is someone that you're trying to motivate to think about or do something. And when you think about the beneficiary, it's associated with a, what water security issue do they care about? What specific metric of that water security issue is the way that they think about that issue? If there's co-benefits in the catchment, and sometimes, especially with water funds, there's a bunch of different actors that all care about the nature-based solution happening. Some of those actors have specific co-benefits they care about, and if it's easy to incorporate those co-benefit analyses into the same evaluation thing, good to do so if it's possible. The second big building block is connecting your ecosystem services to NBS interventions. So if you know you have some water security challenges, and you kind of look at the landscape, and there's what's there and what's missing. Having a high-level idea of, okay, what nature-based solutions would then promote ecosystem services that relate to that water security challenge. And so this is a nice picture of Fred Kahara, who I think may be on the line. This is a talking to your stakeholders. So in this case, you need to talk to the farmers that are supposed to do the things that you want them to do. It's not good to assume that that can just magically happen. Next. So building block number 3 next is determining your business as usual scenario. So your business as usual scenario is what happens if nothing happens in terms of NBS implementation. If this program does not take place, what is the forecasted chain of events? Sometimes, if not so much is going on in the catchment, if there's not a lot of urban development happening, if there's not a lot of deforestation happening, sometimes you can just assume static, but it does require analysis to get there. More often than not, things are likely to change, and it's good to make some kind of analytical process to think through what that business as usual scenario 20, 30 years out might look like. Next. Then, based on that business as usual scenario, it is ideal to contemplate, okay, what set of interventions yield the highest ecosystem service benefit that are relevant to my beneficiary, and ideally based on the least cost basis. And that ideally part is a bit tricky if you hit next. But the conceptual point to communicate here is that it's not the difference between the intervention scenario and a baseline is 0. It's the difference between the intervention scenario and your business as usual scenario that frames the magnitude of benefits associated with your NBS program. Next slide, please. Next. So another important conceptual element to think about is what is the monetary benefit associated with those ecosystem services to your target beneficiary. So a relatively easy one is if you're focusing on water delivery during a dry season period, a way to think about the NBS value provided by that dry season period water availability is what is the cost to the downstream user of getting that water during that period from somewhere else? Like, what are their alternative options that, you know, this is providing a counterpoint to? Next. And then 6 is identifying program costs, organizing, as many of the folks on this call know, especially those involved with water fund development, organizing the NBS program and all the bells and whistles associated with it, such as, you know, oftentimes monitoring, evaluation, and just doing things like ROI analysis, organizing the on-the-ground implementation. All that costs money and time and effort. And so costing that programmatic effort is really important as part of the quote unquote full life cycle costing. Next. And then lastly, once you have all of those elements, you can think about what the overall programmatic viability is. And so there's something in the realm of feasibility studies. There's something in the realm of implementation, and implementation has many different elements of cost. There's usually upfront implementation, maintenance costs, transaction costs for organizing the labor, opportunity costs for, you know, if a farmer is maintaining an area and not planting instead of planting something, that there's an opportunity cost associated with that. So that all falls into this implementation cost bucket. Then you have program management costs. That's the full set of costs. And then you need to quantify your benefit and monetize that benefit. And the time value of that cost versus benefit, because these happen over time and need to be discounted on a net present value basis. Those two things, when compared against each other, are the total economic benefit, the total financial benefit. Next slide. So this is a very complicated schematic, and it's more so designed to communicate the linkages. We presented this as a set of simple conceptual steps. The reality is that there's a lot of linkages between those steps. And so this is framed as a set of analytical processes and a set of input and outputs that relate to those processes. It generally moves from left and right. The things that I really want to call to your attention here is that there's a lot of stuff you need to do prior to getting started. And that if you don't do the technical analysis preparation steps, including identifying your scope and your water security objectives and your specific target beneficiary, you're going to be a lot of pain later on. So spend a lot of time doing that. And then the other element that I would just reflect is that there's a lot of relationships between these inputs and outputs, and that stakeholder engagement is not something that happens at the beginning and the end. There's also a set of intermediate points that you want to be reviewing these inputs and outputs with your stakeholders, because it's basically like a trust exercise. Like you're coming up with a common language to relate the value of this NBS program with your downstream beneficiaries. And so if they don't believe, if they don't find your different steps are credible, they're not going to find the final ROI credible. Next. So we have another poll. I'm going to pass it on to my, it's going to be another section thereafter, which is good in terms of case studies. But the poll here is about which specific NBS options are you interested in evaluating? We try to provide some representative intervention examples here. Emily, the response is still coming in furiously, or?
So it's about 62% of folks have voted so far. It's been 1 minute, so I can maybe give
Yeah.
a few more seconds. Right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it. Uses.
Very cool. Thank you. Interesting. So we have a clear favorite with wetland and riparian restoration, but also clear runners-up in ag BMPs and protection. Neat. Okay, next slide. So we're going to do a detailed walkthrough of the Cape Town example. And I think Tim's on the line, and Tim did the business case for Cape Town, or was involved in the business case of Cape Town. And then recently we did a subsequent level of analysis. So this is like V 2.0 of the business case for Cape Town. So the basic premise of Cape Town, which some of you may be familiar with, is it's a water availability and scarcity issue, where the city of Cape Town and the other members of the Western Cape Water Supply have been working on invasives removal for like 20, 30 years. The problem is these pines and eucalypts in the catchment that were brought over by colonialists a while ago, and the invaded portion of the catchment looked like the thing on the left. We wanted to get to the point on the right where it's native fine bus, and there's been a lot of historical research into the relative water savings of native fine bus versus pines and eucalypts. And so the Greater Cape Town Water Fund is working on restoring the catchment for broader water availability. Next. So the first step is determine beneficiary and unit of measurement. Next. And so when Louise Stafford and company started reaching out, it turned out there was a lot of interested stakeholders in this. There's the city of Cape Town itself, which famously went through a near water zero day. There's the Cape Nature, which is focused on managing these catchments and would really like to have additional funding and support in getting rid of the invasives. There's bottlers like Coca-Cola that care about having water available. So it's clear that the water security priority, there was an analysis, brought these guys together, stakeholders are engaged, and water scarcity was the issue. Next. And the success metric, I'm going to notice with specificity here, is water yield to the water supply system at a 50-year assurance level. That's so like what is the level of security that the water will be there in a given hydrological year. And then co-benefits that were assessed and cared about are sustainable livelihoods that are generated from the clearing activities as well as biodiversity outcomes. Next. Second is defining your NBS interventions. Next. And so the two primary ones are clearing, so it's like mechanical thinning or not mechanical, like basically sawing things down, and then also controlled burns, but that's not being done very heavily yet, but it's sort of in the intermediate phase. And then you need to map this stuff. So where are the invasives? That's a nice chart on the left of sort of where the places where the most invasives are, and the chart on the right is what is the required level of person day cost, because there's some areas that are like on a steep slope and they need to rappel, and there's some places where you need a helicopter into, and that costs more money. So when you're figuring out what the interventions are and what do they cost, there's sometimes a lot of different data elements you need to bring together. Next slide. And so here's some outputs of what the business as usual versus the sort of full implementation looks like. And these were used to motivate a variety of different stakeholders and specifically targeted towards the city of Cape Town. And so the do nothing is the spread of invasives if you do nothing. The reality is that there is catchment activities that have been going on for some time. There are existing agencies that are working it. So that's the business as usual, is those catchment agencies that are already doing good work there. And then the full implementation is what is the invasives level if you actually clear it over a 6-year period. The Louise & Co. You can't ramp up 0 to 100. Even if you have all the money in the world, it doesn't mean you have the implementation capacity to do everything in the world. So it takes some time to actually do the full clearing, but then, and that is associated with that reduction in yield losses from the catchment. Next. And so this is a chart that brings together that full life cycle costing. So you can see the initial costs, which are high, those are the initial clearing costs. And then there's follow-up costs because you need to go back to the same spot after you initially chop it down to make sure it doesn't come back. And then you also have the program management costs in there and maintenance costs. Next. So the full cycle ROI here. So this is, we used as the monetization function, the alternative supply, the long-term alternative supply was deemed to be, in this case, desalination. And so what was helpful is that the city of Cape Town provided a detailed assessment of here's all of our future water supply options. And we were able to quantify what the unit cost of all those other options are, as well as the effective yield. So the nice thing here is that invasives removal was both deemed to be very cheap on a relative basis, like 1/8 the cost of desalination, and provide a good amount of effective yield over that 30-year period. Next. And so this is the chart, which is you have your clearing and follow-up maintenance costs and program management costs. We also included raw water treatment costs because we're trying to make it as apples to these other comparisons as possible. And that generates a total value for the water, that's the avoided water losses, basically. And when you compare those two, it yields a 4.5 times benefit cost ratio. Next. This is just a simplified arrangement. So that's all a lot of very fancy math, but from Luisa's perspective, she knows that she has 55,000 hectares that she needs to clear, and she roughly wants to bite off an equal amount of chunk per year for the next 6 years to get there. So this is how she's thought it through in her brain of, okay, this is how we are logically going to accomplish it. And there's a bunch of different implementers. You can see in the bottom left, all these different logos. There's a bunch of implementers that are already working together in the catchment. And one of the reasons that's such an interesting example is because the water fund's job is not just to motivate new funding to go through the water fund. It's also to motivate these existing actors to work on a common conservation plan and get them to work in the priorities areas over the 6-year period, which is no mean feat. Next. Lastly, something that was interesting as part of this work was that a decision support system has been developed, which is basically taking those in-field activities and plotting them on an online thing so that everyone can see who's working where and how much has been accomplished. And where are the priority areas? And right now we're building this out further so it does automated impact reporting. So not just where people worked, but also what is the estimated water benefit based on the biophysical model that we just showed. And we're hoping to build more of these DSSs in the future for with similar functionality. And next, that should be the whole my side. So it's back to Brooke for shorter, punchier case studies.
Yeah, these will be much, much quicker. All right, let's get started. First off, Quito. Okay. So just to orient you really quickly, there's a circle in the upper left-hand corner of the slide that says unlock support. Those will be sort of referenced back to the slide that we had of what can you use a business case for. We're showing you discrete examples of each of those pieces where it's been applied. Okay, so Quito to start us off with. So the Water Fund was established in 2000 in an effort to improve the water quality and quantity reaching Quito's metropolitan district. So at that point, the watershed was being degraded primarily by agricultural land use change, where forests and páramos were being converted to farm and ranch lands. And you can see that páramos are essentially these really large wetland style structures that are in the upper portions of the catchment. So the Nature Conservancy began working with the local water utility there and a number of other private and public actors to invest in catchment restoration and conservation activities. So there's also a number of non-NBS activities that they're invested in, including education and, really importantly, fencing. This keeps the cattle away from the rivers that supply the water to the city of Quito. So what's really interesting about this study is that it looked at FMAP's period of investment, that's their water utility to date, to help develop the return on investment analysis. So the analysis was completed in 2018, projecting forward to 2035, but the water fund was actually established in 2000. So that means that it was able to consider the period of investment since the water fund was operating and incorporate real monitored data from the utility to validate the analysis. So the return on investment was about 2.15 for the utility, depending on the discount rate used. The discount rate can actually have a sizable impact on the results of your analysis. So it's really critical that you work with your stakeholders to choose an acceptable discount rate that will allow them to compare this potential NBS investment with other alternative investments, whether gray, green, or really a combo of both. Dar es Salaam, on the other hand, is not a water fund. It was a prospective project seeking investment. With a population of more than 4.36 million people, it is the most populous city in Tanzania. Unfortunately, the growth has been so rapid that more than 75% of the urban area is now unplanned residential communities that have really been built on the floodplains and the riverbanks, areas that, of course, are really unsuitable for long-term stable homes. And as you can imagine, infrastructure has been unable to keep up with the growth of the city, and most residents actually still lack access to public services, including sanitation and waste collection. During the rainy season, the Zimbazi River floods part of the city center. That's the river that you can see that is running right through that photo, very close to large infrastructure. And it actually seeps into homes and takes a lot of solid waste and effluents along with it. And the upper part of the basin, unfortunately, has also been deforested for charcoal and agriculture, which is really only further exacerbating the size and the severity of the floods. So to figure out how to quell the impacts of yearly flooding, the Tanzanian government is looking into how green urban development measures could be combined with detention basins and riparian setbacks to really lessen the environmental and social impacts. As a result, they've looked at 5 different scenarios. These 5 scenarios have different combinations of the green urban development activities that you saw on the previous slide. And they're looking at how it would impact the extent of flooding over a 10 and a 50-year period. Those are the 2 different graphs that you see there. And as you can really see, the scenario 1 and 2 have a positive ROI at year 10, while all 5 scenarios eventually reach a positive ROI by year 50. All 5 scenarios, eventually exceed an ROI of 1 at 19 years, if you really dig into the analysis. So out of all the scenarios, scenario 2 actually had both an early positive ROI and a positive net present value. These are 2 different types of indicators that you can use to essentially project the viability or show the viability of your NBS project, depending on what your stakeholders use to make their own investment decisions. So the initial cost of the project would actually be quite large. It's really around $40 million, but the maintenance costs are $1.8 million, much lower than the full initial investment. The government then eventually used these results to garner financial support from the World Bank that will fund the in-city and the catchment restoration activities as part of a large metropolitan development project that also focuses on upgrading infrastructure and improving wash surfaces, among other things. Our last very quick case study is around Cambriu. So Cambriu is another one of our past business cases. It focuses on improving the quality of water going into the local utilities treatment system, so they could spend less money on making the water potable and consequently also lose less water during the treatment process itself. So the analysis found that these benefits would offset about 80% of the company's investment in the NBS program, which, as you smart cookies know, is less than 20% short of a positive ROI. So the program, however, had co-benefits, which included reducing flood risk, which were actually quite strong, and compelling for the utility, even though that wasn't their original intention or reason why they invested in the NBS program. So because the co-benefits and the benefits both exceeded a positive ROI of 1, they took the results of the economic analysis and lobbied their regulator so that they were actually able to invest in nature-based solutions. This actually spurred a regulation change for the entire state of Santa Catarina, where Campo Rio is located. And the utility needed a science-based document that could help them argue their case and show the value of nature in order to make that policy change. And that's really what the business case enabled them to do. All right, so we have another poll question before I hand it over to Carlos Orgeles to talk about the waterproof app. This one is around whether or not an NBS ROI analysis could actually benefit you. So there's a bunch of yeses and nos, and they both have different questions. Different options for the answer. So please choose one, and then whenever enough people have responded, I'll leave it to you to close out.
Sure thing. I'll give folks a full minute, so that's 10 seconds left. Okay, let's share these results.
All right, great. Lots of people interested in conducting an economic and financial analysis, mostly around identifying and prioritizing NBS portfolios, but closely is motivating funding. Excellent. Thank you very much. Carlos, let me flip to the next slide for you. There we go.
Yeah, Brooke. I think it's better if I share my screen because I'm going to manage the prototype. So
let me stop sharing.
All right. Please let me know if you
can see
my screen. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Carlos.
So thank you. My name is Carlos Orgeles. I work mainly supporting modeling and analysis for watersheds conservation at TNC, mainly from the hydrological point of view. And I'm going to present very quickly an initiative that we have been developing. It is a web tool that we have called Waterproof. Waterproof will be a high-level ROI assessment tool designed to provide stakeholders interested in nature-based solutions with a pre-feasibility indicative assessment regarding NBS potential. And within this paragraph, there are some highlighted words that indicate part of the scope of this tool. The system will not be designed for detailed analysis. It is intended as a high-level ROI assessment tool with global capabilities. So it is mainly focused on the analysis of nature-based solutions in basins with detail according to the available global databases. And if it offers a first cursory indicative assessment that can be understood as a pre-feasibility level. Again, I emphasize that the intention of the tool is not to provide detailed results. And this is very important because we do not intend to replace the detailed technical modeling and analysis processes. Waterproof is a global tool that includes the entire planet, and we hope to contribute with analysis for an initial understanding of the opportunities of nature-based solutions for watershed sustainability. Conceptually, the platform has several modules that allow the user to locate a city, define and configure water intakes, select or create new nature-based solutions, configure treatment plants or customize analysis infrastructure, define costs and create case studies, consult, compare, download and share results. We have started with the software development of these modules. We have made progress in the last months with some of the tools that will be incorporated, and also with the development of the web platform. Something important is that although the system in this version will be oriented to the analysis of the infrastructure of drinking water supply systems, it will be possible to incorporate different infrastructure defined by the user. This means that if a user knows the cost of operation and maintenance of the infrastructure, the system can receive this information to perform the analysis. With the project that we are developing, we want to develop version 1.0 of Waterproof. We will feed this version of the system with global databases. However, users will be able to customize the analysis parameters related mainly to costs and conservation activities. We have made a significant effort to collect and analyze global databases and have an appropriate set of information for the system. In this version, we will implement RIOS and INVEST as mathematical models for analysis. The system is not limited to these two model packages, and in future versions, other models can be coupled to the system. We will use cloud computing so that users can run mathematical models in the cloud. We have analyzed the responses of the INVEST models to understand their behavior and suggest a parameterization of the models that allows a reasonable result. However, we are talking about an analysis at the scale of the planet, and for this reason, also the modeling parameters are editable by the user to be able to leave open the possibility of refining the modeling information. And with the selected model package, users will be able to administer and manage nature-based solutions that are mainly found within the transitions managed by RIO software. This is keep native vegetation, revegetation assisted, revegetation assisted, agricultural vegetation management, ditching, fertilizer management, or pasture management. And the system will be equipped with a module that allows the calculation of return on investment and adjustment of the parameterization for the analysis. We expect to launch the platform in the second half of 2021. Of course, each of these elements has a lot of detail, but this is a general idea of the project and the platform. And just to illustrate the concept of the tool, I am going to take a very quick tour for a prototype. Important is that please understand this is just a prototype. The appearance of the tool is actually different. And I just want to present the capabilities of Waterproof a little more graphically. So the system works around the cities as the main access for the analysis. A user can enter the name of a city and explore the available information. The user can define the water intake points, and the system has an algorithm to delineate the basin with the closing point for the water intake. Possible to define the MBS to be evaluated in the basin area. The system will have some MBS preloaded, but the user will be able to define their own MBS. And for these conditions, it is possible to develop the analysis of return on investment. The system here launches the mathematical models for analysis in the basin of interest. In version 1.0, we will have the INVEST and RIOS packages as mathematical models. But as I said, it is not limited to these models and can be incorporated other models into the system. And the results are processed and organized for the user's consultation, in this case as a compact summary with information like total estimated investment and total savings, but also in greater detail that includes some indicators, change in ecosystem services, disaggregated costs, and area of intervention disaggregated as a portfolio. State indicators of the basin in present and future condition, and also results to be able to be visualized spatially. As I said before, although the system will come equipped with preloaded global information, the user can customize values associated with costs and simulation parameters. Then in this section, the user can customize the values of his analysis according to the available information. This allows to have a greater refinement on some of the values that will be by default in the system and that a local stakeholder can have in a more detailed way. And again, with this information, it is possible to perform the analysis again and obtain more detailed information with results that have more local information to calculate the ROI. So right now we are in the software development phase. The initial appearance of the web page is that is what you see on the slide. And well, we are under construction. We hope to have the launch of the tool in October 2021. Of course, all invited to test and use the tool. And well, I think that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Brooke, can we switch back to the other presentation? Because there's a couple things on the engagement plan that I was hoping to talk through as well.
Yes, let me share the
Thank
screen
you.
again.
All right. So just some things specifically to this group. So as Carlos mentioned, the actual public launches are the green boxes in October. And we're having a couple of elements of our rollout plan, including sort of sessions on functionality feedback and alpha and beta testing. But specifically that we're hoping to get some feelings from the Water Funds Network, and this gets to the poll that we're about to ask, is that after we're launching, we're hoping to offer one-on-one support for users that raise their hand and say, we'd like, a tutorial on how to use it, and then we'll load some results, and afterwards we'd like some support in reviewing our results and tweaking them and making them a bit more accurate. So the poll is, if we can go to the next poll or the next slide. So would you be interested in using the ROI app is the poll. And specifically, whether you're just want to be a general user, number 2, or if you're interested in receiving one-on-one support for your specific case. And the reason we need to know that is whether we should organize resources to support that. That's why it'd be helpful to know that. You're not committing to anything, by the way. It's more so just for us to get a general feel of the appetite or the demand from the field.
About 10 seconds left.
Great. This is very helpful. Okay. I can't exactly remember which section is next.
Eustace, if people want one-on-one support and have clicked, do you want them to contact you, or how's best?
That's a great question. Let me, if I'm going to put my email in the chat, and if people want one-on-one support, I'll start creating a list. So I just put my email in the chat, or alternatively follow up with Emily afterwards too. So the next section is, oh yeah, I remember, placing ROI in context. So this is about at what stage does one do ROI analysis, and how does it link to the rest of the stuff? So next. So as most folks on the program here probably know, is that it's a long journey to establish a NBS program, which is usually a matter of years and a lot of back and forth with stakeholders. And so we wanted to give some context for where this fits in versus everything else. So next. So in general, it is critical to clarify your scope and generate alignment to begin with among your catchment actors to understand what they want to do and what their needs are. That's thing one. Even these two boxes for generating alignment and NBS portfolio identification, as we showed here with the ROI app, that ROI app is really meant for a pre-feasibility look. And when you're building a big program, it's recommended not just to do that pre-feasibility look, but actually then go, okay, now that we have this high level look and we want to move forward, what's going to be our actual plan? What's our actual detailed design of the water fund or NBS program going to be? And that involves probably, that's not a small effort, that's probably like a 9-month or a year effort to figure that out. When you're in design, there's other things beside the conservation portfolio that matters. Obviously, there's what's the governance of your program structure? What's the funding strategy of your program structure? Again, very complex things to identify. Then moving into how do you want to monitor and evaluate your outcomes, which then links into the next phase of, okay, now we need to actually go mobilize all these actors. We need to go talk to these farmers and get them to change these practices. And we need to, in Louise's case in Cape Town, we need to go organize all the contractors, go chop down those trees and train the people that will then rappel down from the cliffs to cut down the pines. And then lastly, how does one, report and communicate impact? Because if one does not do that, it's oftentimes harder to attract follow-on funding or support from different members of the catchment. So, and importantly, the M&E design and the impact reporting, those two things, when they're done intelligently, can drive adaptive management. One of the cool parts about green infrastructure and NBS is this idea that you have a portfolio of solutions that you can dial up and dial down, and it's non-binary. Gray infrastructure really suffers from this lock-in, where if you do, build plant here, it means you can't do these other things. And NBS, by contrast, the lock-in is not, we don't suffer from that in the same way. But you do need to intelligently design your program to be able to do adaptive management. It is not a given. So just to, again, put the ROI in context, that it's definitely not the only thing. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to be considered to run a successful NBS program. Next. So this is the last poll, I believe. And this is in the interest of, as we're doing additional guidance and trying to figure out how to support the field best, which of these elements that I just mentioned, these 6 elements, or others, do you personally feel a current support gap? Like, what could you use more help on, or guidance on, or support in, doing?
Right, we'll give folks about another 10 seconds or so, maybe a little longer, since this is a longer question. Okay, let's wrap this up.
All right. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the top need from the people on this call was ROI evaluation and portfolio identification, but also a lot of strong need for M&E design and program governance and funding strategy structuring. Great. This is really helpful context and useful data. All right. I think it's passing back to you guys for connecting to resources.
Yeah, thanks, Eustace. So, not in addition to this webinar, which again, the recording we'll share with everyone, we also added a lot of everything that was described, and including case studies, to our toolbox. So the Water Funds toolbox, the link there is at the top, and I can also put it in the chat. But this is where you'll find, the report as it stands now on module 2, as well as a couple templates. And then I think, yeah, if you go to the next slide, it should also show that we actually have a lot of the case studies mentioned available online. So let me go ahead and put that link in the chat for you guys. And Brooke's email address is also on the website too. So in case you didn't jot it down here, you can always just click on that email and contact her with questions or for additional support. Yeah, and honestly, I think that's about it. So kind of at the perfect minute mark for spending the last 30 minutes for any questions and discussion. I also noticed that in the chat, there were some of the questions were already addressed. I think, I don't know if any of them were honestly left unaddressed.
There's one question that came up from Rowan on the efficacy of different sediment models, and I know, Brooke, you wrote a response to that, but I was wondering, Carlos, since you, given your hydrology background, if you had any additional things to add to Brooke's comment. Carlos?
Yeah, I didn't see the answer from Brooke.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
So the question was, I mean, Rowan, you're on the line. Do you want to ask your question directly?
I am on the line.
Yeah,
great presentation, by the way. Hi, Eustace. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my question was just about like the models for ROI really depend on having good predictions on what your interventions are going, what the outcomes will be. And I was just thinking, in one case it might be TSS, and you're modeling some TSS removal. And I was wondering how good the models are in predicting actual performance, and have we been able to track water fund projects in order to actually see what the model outcome is against actual performance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got it. Well, probably a couple of things regarding that. First thing is that, yes, if you want to have a good prediction, you are going to need to have a good model. But it's not only a good model in terms of the processes that can represent, it is also a good model that represents in a calibration and validation the data that you have. That's the way that you can that you can ensure that your model has good performance. So, for example, in our experience with waterproof, just looking, for example, at Invest, yeah, one of the things that we have found is that, for example, in Invest, you need to calibrate the model, and that is because the range of the uncertainty of the response of these kind of models is huge, and it is almost all the sedimentological models that we are using that have this particularity, right? Because when you are trying to represent a process that is so complex as erosion and transport and other things with sediments, it is important just to have good data in the field to represent this data and to try to minimize the uncertainty through a calibration process. So short answer is yes, you will need a good model in that terms. Otherwise, you're going to have a huge uncertainty, and probably the range of the variability of the responses can be so huge that actually you can find that your ROI can be less than 1 or much more than 1. So yeah, that's the idea that I have.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos, for that answer. And I think you're pointing towards sort of the driver in that uncertainty and why I asked that question. But time will tell, right?
Yep, that's it.
Great, thanks. Anyone also with questions, feel free to unmute your mic and raise them verbally. It doesn't have to be in the chat. I had actually one, or just more of a conversation curiosity, but I noticed, for the folks that indicated in the polls, other, I didn't know if there were any thoughts from the presenters. I think I jotted some of them down. think it was like in the first question about wildfire risk reduction. And I think also to that point, I don't think it was an option to select forest restoration density and fuels reduction. I know there was like invasive species removal, but I think, there can be maybe other forest fuel reduction as well. I didn't know if there was any reactions about those. Oh, and look, I think Fred had rural earthen roads and steep lands erosion management.
I'm happy to give it a shot. So so absolutely, Fred, on the rural roads management, that's also something that's pursued among our Brazilian colleagues, I believe. And yeah, so that there is a lot of different NBS interventions, and we just listed like some of the greatest hits, but we weren't able to be exhaustive on there. Those indeed are cool things that are happening in the NBS community. The other piece on sort of forest fuel reduction, usually that's because we were listing there water security related benefits, and so usually if it's either it's not a water security related benefit, i.e. if you're trying to reduce forest fuel to reduce property loss, that's a avoided damages assessment, which is great, but just have that list was specific. We just use that list for water security related benefits, or it is a water security related benefit, in which case you're trying to avoid forest fuel reduction to things like avoid catastrophic sedimentation at the point of the water intake. So it's like a very specific avoided sedimentation spike that you're trying to avoid. That's at least my understanding. So it still can, depending on the framing, neatly fit into that category, I think.
Yeah, and then in our upcoming resources, so module 1 specifically talks about kind of choosing your technical NBS options. And we have included things like forest management, forest thinning, and fire risk reduction as some of the NBS that we'll be exploring a little bit more deeply there.
Awesome, thanks guys. Looks like Barbara just put a question in the chat, so it should be at the most recent, but have there been many return on investments done for flood risk reduction using nature-based solutions?
Yes, I think that's mine. Yes, we just finished an analysis in Panama City with the Juan Diaz River Basin. And yes, it's really interesting because when you are trying to look at the flood risk reduction, you have a lot of possibilities in terms of nature-based solutions, right? You can use sustainable urban drainage systems. You can use detention ponds. You can look at the changes in land cover and land use change. So yes, we have an experience there. It was really interesting. You need a different kind of approach for the analysis because in the other kind of ROI analysis, you are using like long-term analysis based on, you want to have the response in terms of 30 years, 25 years or something like that. But when you are talking about flood risk reduction, you need to look at some kind of events that are the critical ones just to produce the floods into the cities. And that needs a different framework. So in that case, for example, we use a HMS model just to evaluate events with different return periods and just to evaluate the different kind of nature-based solutions that are able just for that basin. We found 20 different options for nature-based solutions. And at the end, we figure out a method to combine different kind of nature-based solutions to have like different targets of flood risk reduction. And yes, I mean, it's different, but it's kind of the same framework, but with different tools just to evaluate the infrastructure and just to be able to evaluate the interaction between green and gray infrastructure, because in that case, it's critical to consider that.
I'd also add to Carlos's note that so Tim actually worked on the World Bank one that was referenced for DAR. So that's, Carlos was talking about the Panama one. There's the DAR one that was presented. Also, those are all riverine flooding, I think is the term. But there's also like coastal flooding ones, and there's a couple of examples there of NBS ROI quantifications, which I'm happy to send through if it's useful, that are not, watershed related NBS. But the reality is that the evidence or the publication base for the flooding one is much thinner than, sedimentation or water availability. Is that fair, Carlos?
Yes, yes, and that's because you can see the result very quickly in terms of the nature-based solution, right? You are just retaining water, or you are producing a land use change that it produces an immediate change in the runoff. So it is a benefit that you can perceive very quickly and very real into the basin.
Seeing some more dialogue in the chat. Thanks, Brooke, for being willing to send those resources. Any other questions from folks? Looks like there's one from Boris. Are the presenters aware of other return on investment studies that may have been created by other institutions?
Yes, we have a good library of external ROI studies. Emily, maybe I can work with you to put them on the toolbox. So just so they're available externally. But Boris, I'm going to email you anyways about the Quito, so I'll include a couple links there. But we have ROI studies ranging from urban flooding or urban green infrastructure to sedimentation, water quality, nutrient loading. And then we have a couple of new recent ROI studies that have been completed in the last year and a half that speak specifically to the return on investment for pure protection versus a restoration of degraded watershed. This is sort of a preemptive protection to ensure water quality. So I'm happy to share those, Emily.
Awesome. Any other final questions? Okay, great. Well, if other thoughts or questions do arise, feel free to email me or the presenters. Again, there's a lot of resources on the toolbox page presenting all this great information. I think I'll just do like one last reminder that this webinar was recorded, and I will be sending out the link to a box folder with the presentation materials and the recording, hopefully by yeah, just a little later this week. Sometimes it takes a while to upload, but yeah, just expect that resource, and also keep an eye out for a newsletter or email from me, because we're going to be doing our annual Water Funds Network survey of our members. So please do complete that when you have a chance. It's not ready yet, but will hopefully go out by end of this week. Yeah, I welcome the presenters. If there's any last final comments or thoughts or anything that I might have missed, but just wanting to thank them sincerely for their time and excellent work on this yeah, intensive project.
I'll just make a plug that the other modules that we raised in the presentation will be available summer 2021. So keep an eye out for those. There'll be some interim communications coming out about them. And just a big shout out to Emily. Thank you for pulling all of us together and giving us this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thanks for
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.